Welcome to our first season of the podcast, Growth from Darkness. We are your hosts, Amanda Blackwood.
And Chrysanthi Dokos from Coast to Coast. As some of our listeners know, we're both survivors of complex trauma, and it's our mission to help others experiencing similar issues.
This season, we're going to be digging into trauma reactions, their long-term consequences, and how we fight back to live our best lives. When it comes to bargaining, just some of the examples, I think that's probably like the best way to describe what it is that bargaining is to kind of get through it. One of my examples would be when I was in Scotland, I kept on wanting to go back and bargain with my former self. If only I'd known. I wish I'd never gone there before. I wish I had never gone to Scotland. Please, God, if you can just take me out of here. You know, those kinds of things. Those are unhealthy bargainings. Everybody has at least one bargaining scenario that they've used after a traumatic event.
I've experienced a lot of the what ifs and if only, and that actually sends you down into a deep spiral of negative self-talk and
Yes.
Impacting on your sense of self, and then it can go down into your mental health. And I had a situation where I was involved with somebody who I thought was the absolute perfect human being for me. As I've said before, I was being narcissistically abused, so I really got caught up in that love bombing stage. And then, things started to change. And when they started to change, I started to question myself, thinking, is this just me? Is it him? So there was that gaslighting. But then after the relationship ended, because I did put a stop to that relationship, I just kept saying to myself, how could I have got sucked in again?
Right.
I've been down this track before. Why? Why did you allow it to happen to yourself? If only you'd just done this rather than done that. If only you'd just had a quick romance and didn't get involved on a more deeper level. And that actually spiraled into me ending up in a psych unit.
Oof. You're talking about the shoulds. Now, that's all definitely a huge part of the bargaining stage. I always tell people, don't should all over yourself. Should is not a word that needs to be quite so prevalent in our vocabulary. I think we all use it way too much. The basic need for control for somebody who has experienced trauma can leave us with that should feeling. And that word should, you're still blaming yourself for the abuse. You're telling yourself, I shouldn't feel this way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You're saying that because you do feel this way, and you're invalidating your own feelings. You say, I should know better. I should have known better. You are, again, putting yourself back in the position of saying, he wouldn't have been able to do this if I had prevented it.
Exactly.
So you're blaming yourself again. You are trying to take control of the situation again. If you feel something, you feel it because you're human. These emotions that we feel are perfectly normal. If you remove the should or shouldn't from some of those examples, their entire meaning changes. So rather than saying, I shouldn't feel this way, if you leave the word shouldn't out of there completely, it changes to, I feel this way. And that is understanding where you are and what it is that you need to be able to process.
Exactly. And before I respond to that comment, let's delete should out of every dictionary on the planet.
Yes. It's still a very handy word in certain situations, but I would say it should be, see, there I am saying it. It doesn't need to be as frequently used as we use it.
No. Well, going back to that example, I shouldn't feel this way, and you saying it, I feel this way. That's actually a really self-empowering statement, because what you're actually doing then is acknowledging where you are, and by that simple acknowledgement and doing it in a positive way allows you then to deal and process with the trauma or the experience that's occurred. So removing should out of every statement that we make is self-empowering.
Yes, absolutely. I agree.
And then with trauma, that's where trauma victims need to go. They need to put the trauma behind them and become self-empowered enough to take control of their lives back again in terms of being able to live a fulfilled life and be mentally stable and to have a whole sense of self. Well, ultimately, that's what our goals are in recovering from trauma.
Right. Life is hard enough without us trying to bounce all of this negativity off of our own brains. If I knew somebody who was as critical of me as I am critical of me, I wouldn't want to hang out with that person. That person would not be my friend.
Yeah, I'm with you, girl. I'm with you there. It's incredible, isn't it? Just how self-critical we can be, and that itself is a trauma response. That need for perfectionism is a trauma response, and it's all part of that whole bargaining aspect as well.
Right.
Of trauma.
Okay. Yeah. So far we've established that the word should doesn't provide any value to us.
No.
There's no positive outcome to using it at all.
No.
And that single word can make our negative emotions harder to process, leave us feeling more guilty for having those emotions at all, and compound the problem.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
And that problem, the bargaining, that's where the word should seems to belong. That's where we use it the most, is when we're trying to figure out how we can bargain our way out of an issue.
Now, did we actually establish that bargaining is the third stage of trauma responses?
Well, if we didn't, you just did. Thank you.
We talked about anger being the first one. Sorry,
Right.
denial.
Denial's the first.
Denial's the first one. Anger, and now bargaining. I think it's really important for our listeners to understand that you can go through these stages within minutes of each other. It doesn't have to be a linear thing of, oh, yes, now I'm in the denial stage and now I'm in the anger stage, and that happened over several months or years. It can literally happen within several minutes of each other.
It's not at all like climbing a flight of stairs or climbing a ladder. It's more like winding your way through a mountain range.
Yeah, I like that analogy. That's a good analogy.
It's so easy for us to distract ourselves from the reality of our situations by using this bargaining tool. Our brain comes up with this as a way to help us not have to face things quite yet. We're starting to kind of take on an inkling of almost a hint of acceptance, but we still believe that we can gain back some of that control by bargaining it away and saying, well, I can change this. I can do this. I should do this. That's not the way trauma works. You're not going to just say, okay, I'm going to bargain my way out of this. I'm going to say that I am going to skip right over the anger and the depression, and I'm going to go straight to acceptance, and I'm just going to be this tower of strength. And what you end up doing is you talk about a lot of your traumas with people who aren't ready to hear them yet, and you go into details that they definitely aren't ready to hear yet, and you end up traumatizing other people because of your bargaining your way out of trauma responses.
Exactly. Actually, that's a really important point to make, because I remember after a particularly traumatizing relationship, for a number of years, I went through this, as my sister would call, a victim mode. And she kept saying, stop being the victim, because I just wanted to keep talking about it. I wanted to just try and understand it, and kept saying, I could have done this and I could have done that. And I just kept going through that anger or denial, anger, bargaining. I just kept looping through that for a number of years before I actually went through a depressive stage, and but I can remember her just saying to me really clearly, and I got angry with her for saying, well, this happened. Why don't you want to hear this? You know, it will help me, and you need to understand. And, you know, now I look back on it and I think, you poor woman, having to deal with with me in that state, when what I needed to do was actually go and see a counsellor
Right.
to be able to deal with it.
And that goes back to some of the stuff that we were talking about in the first episode too, about the different types of trauma. Talking to her constantly about the trauma, especially if you're going to into detail, can actually be quite traumatizing for her, because
Mm,
eventually her brain allows her to start picturing and visualizing the
mm,
trauma that you're describing.
exactly, exactly. So it's, you know, it's so important that if you've experienced a trauma situation that has impacted on you so greatly, I think it's just so important to be able to go and talk to a professional about it, because A, they're trained, and B, not only are they trained, but they also have their own support. So when they're dealing with really challenging situations, they have a team around them to help them so that they don't get traumatized by your story.
Right, exactly. I have never met a therapist that didn't have a therapist. Just thinking a little bit more about what denial means in general. It's interesting, but life can get so much infinitely better when we allow ourselves to feel that stuff, taking out the word should,
Mm,
and we start to experience things without regrets, without
mm,
expectations. We stop trying to should all over ourselves.
mm.
Um,
I love that.
we allow ourselves to start feeling what it is that we've needed to feel all along,
Mm.
and there's no possible way to get through this stuff without starting to feel it.
And that's the most difficult aspect of being a trauma victim or having experienced trauma, because allowing yourself to feel those feelings is the most frightening thing. It's, I remember when at a particular time when I started to allow myself to feel some of these traumatic experiences that I'd had, um, I felt completely out of control because I was so angry, and I had cortisol coursing through my body all the time. Um, and feeling that anger, I felt depleted, but I went through it, and now I don't feel that anger anymore. And I'm in a happy place. I'm in a good place.
Right.
But actually allowing yourself to feel that is the most frightening thing. And I think for a lot of people, that's how they end up trapped in that victim place, because it's too scary to actually process those feelings.
Yes, absolutely. And it's I said this to somebody the other day, but unlike that unused tub of pimento spread in the fridge that's been there since 1983, there is no expiration date on feelings.
Oh, I love that. You just make me laugh, honestly. And that is so true. There isn't an expiration date. Like, you can feel the same feeling that you did at 5 years old when, you know, in my case, when my father belted me. I still feel that in my stomach when I say it out loud.
Yeah, yeah. You're always going to feel that too. And when I went to meet Lori Holden, she was one of the actresses on The Walking Dead. I met her in February 2008. She had personally gone down to Cartagena with an anti-trafficking organization to
Mhm.
help get kids out of trafficking, and I wanted
Mm.
to go and thank
Yeah.
work for. She's a hero.
Mm,
She's
mm.
helped to save 55 kids. It was
Wow.
incredible. She put on a wig and glasses so nobody would recognize her, and she was physically there in the building during the operation, helping to keep the kids calm and safe.
Oh, that's phenomenal.
I was blown away. So I
Mm.
went to her and I told her about my own experiences. And this is well before I was willing to really start talking about it yet. Now, this
Mm-mm.
was 2013. This was a long time ago. Um, so, or 2014, somewhere around there. Anyway, it's been about a decade.
Yeah.
She said to me, she signed a photo for me, and she said to me specifically, she said, there's a line from the TV show that I with. The pain never really goes away. You just get used to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's it. It doesn't go away. And it doesn't, I want to say it doesn't really even get better. It just changes. It just changes to something that we have learned to accept, which is the final um, step of the trauma. It changes into something that we learn to be a little bit more okay with.
Mm-hmm.
And then she challenged me to see what I could do to make a difference in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been on this
Yeah, you are.
trajectory ever since, thanks to her.
You are. You're making an incredible difference to the world with sharing your story through your art, through your writing, through your speaking. You're incredible.
Thank you. It's still difficult for me to take compliments, as it is for most survivors of abuse.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's a normal thing too.
Certainly is. And I think I've really struggled with that concept of, you're always going to feel it. But I suppose what I've done is actually just said to myself, that is my lived experience. I can't change the past. The past has happened. Things happened. I wasn't able to take control in specific situations because the person who was attacking me overpowered me. That was it. Full stop. And even though I might still harbour feelings about it, I think just accepting, for me, when sort of moving further down the track now in terms of the responses, that acceptance has allowed me to come out the other end. And yes, I do feel it at times, but it's not the same because I've got a better understanding of where I was at the time, where the perpetrator was at the time, and how I have power in how I respond from here on in to my feelings, to my memories, and to future situations.
And that is honestly the best way to be able to fight back too. I mean, when we're looking down the barrel of this kind of behavior that we're going through, I the best way to start fighting back is to allow yourself to feel that stuff.
Mm.
You
Mm.
know, the feelings are going to show up when they show up.
Yep.
We can't really control much of that. And as
Absolutely.
much as people might hate to hear it, it is our job to allow those feelings to exist and to exist with them.
Mm.
They can show up anywhere from days to weeks to decades after what it is that's caused the emotions in the first place. I mean,
Mm.
I having the flashbacks and stuff to when I was a kid. I didn't even remember any of the stuff that happened until I was like 26 years old. That was 2 decades after that form of abuse occurred.
Mm.
You
Mm.
know, and as much as it might suck, we can absolutely learn how to cope with that sadness, whatever it is that we need to feel. Yeah, and it's still going to hurt, but it becomes less overwhelming with time.
And I think that's the main point there that we can make, is that the overwhelming feelings diminish. They no longer take control of our lives
Right.
when we go through this recovery and healing journey. Because
Right.
ultimately what we want to do as human beings is have a fulfilled life, to be able to have friendships, to be involved in our community, to to have a job or run a business or whatever. We want to participate and live, as opposed to what I've had before, which is just simply to exist.
Right. Me too. Yeah. And that's a scary place to be. I mean, it's lonely, it's isolating, it's terrifying. You know, it's one of the worst places in the world that I ever existed, and I was there for 38 years.
Mm, mm, mm. Well, interestingly enough, I did that for a better part of 50 years.
Yeah.
So, I can finally say at 56, I'm in a good place, and I'm in a really happy place and enjoying my daily life. I wake up in the mornings and listen to the birds, and it brings a smile to my face. So
And that's beautiful. And I love that you get to do that, especially with the incredible birds that you have there in Australia.
I know we've got some amazing birds. But anyway, is there anything more that we need to add about bargaining? Because I think, with our format, what we tend to do is we, describe what bargaining or the topic is, then we talk about the impacts and whether or not we can move out of it. And I think we've sort of covered that really, haven't we?
Yeah, I think we just kind of moved all the way through it and left that jar of pimento spread in the fridge still.
Did we talk about the feigning? It's really interesting because going back to, trauma responses. So imposter syndrome is one of the things that I've dealt with for my whole life. So in preparation for today, of course, I had to go back and do my swatting. And I came across a term that I hadn't come across before. So, traditionally there is the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or as you mentioned to me before off air, the please response instead of the fawn response. I came across a phrase or a word. So it's fight, flight, freeze, and feign. So the fawn response or the pleasing response is basically people pleasing and constantly doing things to diminish your own needs and wants and desires over somebody else's. So somebody else's needs, wants, desires is more important than you. That's very much a trauma response.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
with this idea of feign, and the woman who came up with this, I'm going to really botch her name because I've never seen this spelling before and I don't know how to say it, but I will try. So she wrote an article in Psychology Today in June 2021, and her name is Kathy Malglottal. I think that's how we pronounce it. But anyway, she's got a PhD in a whole range of things. So I'm taking her idea on. She talks about feign as in FEIGN. So what she says is that it's like a purposeful action to stay safe. So when someone is being attacked or, with a perpetrator, the survivor of that experience, or the victim, depending on how we want to phrase it, actually makes a conscious decision to pretend that something is happening to them. I'm just trying to think of an example to make it clear because I think I'm going around in circles. So say, for example, if someone is assaulting you, physically assaulting you, and you over respond in terms of the pain response, so that you might pretend to go unconscious and faint or whatever. And so by doing that, you're actually making a conscious decision to do that. it's called feigning, because then the perpetrator will stop their behaviour. I mean, if you've collapsed on the floor, they're not going to continue kicking you or whatever. And so she was saying that it's actually an adaptive way of dealing with a traumatic experience. But what she also goes on to say is that it could become maladaptive if that becomes your go-to default position. If you're consciously always trying to bargain in that way, then it becomes a learned behaviour, and it diminishes our sense of self. It diminishes our mental health and quality of life. But initially, it can actually be a very adaptive way, so that we as victims or survivors can actually take control of a specific situation at that time. We make a conscious decision, whereas in the past, when people have talked about fawning, it's been seen as more of an automatic response.
Right.
Did that make sense? I feel like I'm babbling.
No, it totally makes sense. I mean, this is right along the lines of the things that are so difficult to explain anyway, that I had looked up a lot of this stuff. I hadn't read her research specifically. But yeah, it's our brain's way of tricking us into thinking that we can control a situation. And it's really handy at the time, because it allows us time to adjust and to start going through the next stages of trauma. And it's not like bargaining with a person that's got a gun against your head. Hey, I'll do whatever you need me to do. It's more bargaining within ourselves is the trauma response. Bargaining at the moment of the trauma is a super healthy response. Let's keep me alive.
Yeah. Swatting means, like working really hard and sort of before an exam, for example, just doing a whole lot of revisions so that you can pass your exam. That's an example of swatting.
Much better than what we'd find if we Googled, because, over here in the States, swatting would be grabbing a tool to be able to kill the flies.
It's SWOT as in SWOT, as opposed to SWAT as in SWAT. Isn't that interesting? Like, we have to take account for those cultural differences. Well, I'm wondering whether we've covered everything. Do you want to just do a quick recap of what we've talked about, so that our listeners aren't totally bamboozled with all the ins and outs of what we've discussed?
So bargaining is where we try to make deals with a higher power to reverse whatever trauma effects we're feeling. The long-term effect is that need for constant control of all situations in your life, even when there is no control over certain aspects. You might be able to control which direction your car is driving, but you cannot control where the potholes are and if you're going to hit them necessarily. Long-term consequences are pretty ugly. So our best way to fight back from it is to learn to accept. The acceptance stage does come later on, but that bargaining, a good way to fight back against that is to stop trying to shoot all over ourselves.
I think that's a fantastic summary, what bargaining is all about. So thanks so much, Amanda. It's been wonderful, as usual, to spend time with you talking about trauma and, growing from that darkness.
Don't forget, do you remember what our subject is for next week?
Depression.
Yeah. That's the ugly one. Nobody really wants to talk about this one, but we're going to anyway.
We are. It's so important that we do talk about it, and, let our listeners know that there is a way out.
I look forward to talking to you again, getting into the darkness of it.
You can find out more about Growth from Darkness through the website www.growthfromdarkness.com. You can also learn more through the Facebook page, which can be found at facebook.com/growth from darkness. Thank you.